Hello, welcome to the Vega podcast, your source for insights on all things FinOps and cloud optimization. Today we have John Buccola from E78 Partners. John is the CTO there, and he has a deep background in private equity operations, private equity investments, optimization, and IT. We actually found out we share an interesting first job together. So we'll talk more about that here in the episode. We look forward to sharing insights from John around how to think about cloud and cloud optimization. If you enjoy the content today, please like and subscribe. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to the Vega podcast. I'm lucky to be joined here today by John Buccola, who is the CTO of E78 Partners and a key Vega cloud partner. So, John, thanks for joining us.
Great to be here, Kris. Thanks for having me.
For folks that don't know you, could you give us just a little bit of your background, where you come from, the experience you've had in helping PE and going through those things, and just I think that would be helpful for our viewers just to understand where you're coming from.
Sure. Well, it all started on a help desk. I was 18 years old, just barely. And that's where I started in IT, literally on the help desk. It's the best place to start in IT because you realize very quickly that technology is more of a people game than it is a computer game. And so it was a great place to start. But I quickly moved on from that wonderful help desk job into a KKR backed company, a middle market company. This was in the late 90s, early 2000s. Back then, private equity was just kind of a newer idea in business. And I cut my teeth at this company as a middle market company that KKR owned. And I served there for 8 years and eventually became their head of IT. Um, Moved on from there to another middle market company called Panavision and worked again with a very large private equity firm there for several years. I did another tour with a middle market private equity firm, private equity backed company that was sold to EQT. So I've worked in middle market settings as an IT leader for private equity backed firms for my whole career, except for my little stint in the help desk.
Nice.
So it's always been on the operating side. I did flip over from being an operator into working on the delivery side for a service provider, and then eventually partnered with private equity and became, again, CTO of a firm that's private equity backed. So somehow you just never can plan these things. My career has just always been affiliated with private equity, whether it's as an operator in a middle market company, um, providing services to private equity backed firms, interacting with those firms and really kind of getting to know their needs. And today, serving as a CTO for a private equity backed firm as well. So it is the reality of my world. It's certainly the reality of a lot of folks' worlds as well. There's thousands and thousands of PE firms operating globally that own even more companies. And the amount of uninvested capital today, last time I checked, it was tipping the scales at just about $3 trillion. So a lot of capital. This is a structure that is becoming much more common, especially in the middle market. And so, yeah, that's a little bit of my background. But I'm a tech nerd through and through.
That's awesome. Well, we actually, I didn't realize it. We actually share the first job. My first job in IT was help desk as well, for a very small home office of like 12 people. And so I was the guy who did everything. And you're right. You sort of learn that it's a people game, and that's been super helpful for me along my journey as well. So I'm glad we share that same connection. It's also, thanks for the background, bleeds really well into our topic because we're going to talk about how technology leadership can help reshape the private equity value creation, and why CIOs or IT leaders have become such a critical driver of business value and business outcome. And so you've got a lot of experience doing that with your existing clients before as an operator. And so I'm excited to kind of dive right into there. So I think the first thing I want to talk about today is really kind of the state of IT leadership when it comes to private equity. So I think before, in my experience, I hadn't had private equity experience, but definitely IT leadership experience. And I think one of the things I learned was that people look at IT a lot as a cost center. And so I think before, people were sort of just, and I would assume maybe that private equity would look at it the same way and say, okay, how do we just cut costs here? And I would hazard a guess that has become a little bit more strategic. And so we'd love to hear from you about your thought about how that's evolved over the last decade or so, from maybe more cost cutting and basic sort of things to, hey, IT is actually really strategic to have in the conversation, at least from a private equity perspective. I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
We've had, I think, these cues over the past couple of decades as to IT's importance. I think the first was ERP platforms as an indicator of scalability, as a common language between acquisitions in the private equity world that allowed a company to really harness the scale of acquisitions, to have a common set of data, operational data and financial data to work off of. So that was kind of the big cue number one. And then very quickly thereafter was the internet and mobile applications, mobile devices. And that was sort of all wrapped in this two-word thing that we all know is digital transformation. Is how do we take our business and tech enable it and really put and harness the power of the internet and the mobile applications behind our enterprise. And then the third kind of not so subtle cue that's in everybody's face is AI. And so if a business didn't kind of pick up on the first one, which is, gee, we need common systems, or they didn't pick up on the second one that said, hey, we've got to digitize and tech enable this business, they're certainly picking up on this third one, which is really about harnessing the power of artificial intelligence and what it can bring. I think ChatGPT just really created a wrapper that everybody understood over a technology that has been around for a long time, which is essentially machine learning. It's just now called AI, and it also has taken the form of the massive compute and capabilities around what these GPT models, these LLMs that have been created. And so I think this is the state of where we are today. None of those prior two eras have gone away either. In fact, they're even more important. You can't really harness AI without having great systems. um, you're going to be able to collect more data and make that data more relevant and deliver that data and deliver those insights back to your users if you have a tech-enabled, digitally transformed enterprise. And now you've got AI, which really puts that all together and then allows for a massively disruptive um, innovation that cascades through the business internally, and how the business operates, how people interact with one another, and then how we think about the business, how we think about pricing, how we think about scale, how you think about acquisitions, how you think about interacting with the customer, how the customer interacts with you. It's all of those things. It ripples through all of it. And it just happened really almost overnight. And so I think the state of things today is the IT leaders really have to do all of it. There's not really any exception. There's no shortcuts around putting systems in place or putting in mobile devices and connecting your enterprise. And now, in the same vein, there's really no shortcuts with AI either. So the job keeps getting more and more complex. Um, I think the demands on IT leaders are only accelerating to understand the business, to understand the people and the dynamics inside of a business, and how and what they're going to solve next and how they're going to do it. And so it's it was much more prescriptive in the old days, in the old help desk days that you and I lived, Kris. It was a much more prescriptive, I think, idea. You sort of chose A or B, open source or commercial. Um, am I going to do Microsoft or am I going to do Novell or something? And it's not that easy anymore. I think we're bombarded with lots of choice, and sequencing what to do when is kind of the art of the business that we're in.
Yeah, and I think that's a great perspective. And I think one of the challenges we see too with our customers is this sort of change from managing costs to managing investments, right? And you talked a little bit about it in terms of you really need to understand the business, because if you're going through digital transformation, if you're going through AI enablement, or whatever it might be, it's really thinking through like how do you manage those things so they don't get out of control. We're going to talk about our partnership here in a minute, why that's really important. But I think that's something that I've really recognized, and I'm sure you have too, in terms of customers struggling with the high cost of IT in general, right? So having software all over the place, having cloud all over the place, like really getting a handle around, okay, what are the investments I care about? How are they going to enable my business? And to your point, like what's the intersection between business outcomes, business drivers, and those kinds of things, and then the investments I'm making in technology to make those happen.
Yeah, I think two things are true at the same time, right? One, IT costs will be and continue to be scrutinized forever and ever. Amen. Okay. so, so that will always be the case, always been the case. It will always be the case. Nothing's going to change there. All right. So, spoiler alert, IT costs will always be scrutinized no matter what kind of a change agent you are, no matter what kind of a digital revolutionary you might be, your P&L will absolutely be scrutinized. I can guarantee you that. Um, so that's absolutely true. And then two, there are some prudent investments that businesses can make in technology that can fundamentally transform the business and that pay back not only in financial ways but in strategic ways as well. And so those two things are both true at the same time. Oftentimes, what IT leaders find is that within their own enterprise, they can redirect how those investments are getting made, and they can think about them a second time, even if they've just done a review of the estate of all of their spend. Let's say 6, 8, 12, 24 months ago, you can look at it again. And I say that because there's always opportunity in it. I joke sometimes that if you have a basket of groceries, I can promise you I can find that same basket of groceries for less. I may have to run around to 12 stores, but I can absolutely find it for less. And there's I think inherently we all know that, but it's at some point you go to your 3 stores and you put your pencil down, you go, okay, that's it, I'm done. I got to move on with my life. And sometimes I think the IT P&L is kind of the same way. You've got your key vendors. You've scrutinized maybe how those are being deployed, the license state that you have, the utilization underneath those, um, maybe the ways in which they're being used, the licensing levels. In the cloud world, how you're deploying your cloud assets, those workloads, where those are going, you kind of do it and you just get fatigued. And at some point, you're there to do a job, which is to deliver innovation and harness the innovation for the business. And so it's incredibly important for technology leaders to have within their wheelhouse, whether it's an in house capability or an external capability, um, some capability to visualize, understand, quantify, and action upon potential optimizations in their infrastructure so that they can fund innovation. And so I would tell you that if you're an IT leader in a company, that there are exceptional ways to do that with third parties. So you don't have to build that capability in house, that you can harness that capability, the visibility, the control, and the optimization without having to build it in house. Even businesses at scale actually realize that it doesn't make sense to do that in house. You can find uh, ways to do it without having to build it. So yeah, I think those two things are true. It's absolutely the case that costs are going to be scrutinized, and then two, there are potential new ways to harness technology and to invest differently in the business and realize a return off of those investments.
No, it's a great point, and I think that kind of leads into our next topic around the partnership that we have together, E78 and Vega. And I think what's interesting here is when I hear you talk, it's like, boy, I remember the days of working with my IT P&L and trying to figure out where costs were getting allocated and making sure you sort of had all those buckets, right? Because it's really important. It starts with really cleaning house and saying, hey, listen, how do I have this big bucket of funds, and by the way, because of digital transformation, because of all these things that I've invested in, the budget is much bigger now. So it's impacting the global P&L. And I need to better understand how those things are impacting. So what are my costs for this particular business unit or this division or this function or whatever it might be? And I think one of the things that we have really worked hard on at Vega is to sort of think about data and think about the costs in a way that allows you to align it to your business, because I do think that's a really important thing. I think you talked about it earlier, like that alignment between your business outcomes, what drives your business, how do you do that, and understanding layering in those costs so that it's not this thing where, because yeah, you could definitely do it yourself. It's going to take you a lot of time to sort of iron out all that stuff. And I think that's one of the things that makes our partnership beautiful. It's like, hey, listen, there's definitely work here that needs to happen, right? Which is where you guys come in. But I think from our side, we want to enable that. Right? So make sure that people can allocate any way that they want. They can set up the business units. They can set up their charges. Really understand kind of where the costs are going, so that they can then set up the controls and then get to optimization. Right? Because if you don't even understand what you're spending, I don't know how you're going to fix it. Right? So you sort of have to figure out, okay, what's production, what's not, like all these things, and do that in a way that makes sense to global leadership, so that you can explain why you're doing certain things. Right? So I think one of the things I'd love to talk about a little bit for you is why is our partnership important to E78? Why is it different? What do you guys think about it? And you touched a little bit on it, obviously third party and being able to do these kinds of things, but would love to sort of get your thoughts on it.
Yeah, no, so first of all, E78 is in the business of value creation, first and foremost. If you think about value creation, especially in the context of private equity and business, you've really got three levers. Okay. Lever number one is cost. Okay. So straight up, you're going to create value by reducing your cost. It's a powerful lever because every dollar you reduce on cost, effectively, if you can drop that to the P&L, sometimes let's say if your margins are 20%, you've got to earn $5 to get that 20 cents of margin. So if you can cut a dollar, that's like you just gained $5 on the top line. So it's really, really powerful lever for value creation. Um, Two is revenue, right? So top line. So how are you going to grow the business? How do you align your assets if you're in the IT space? How do you enable and empower your front line to either sell more, grow organically, and so on? So that's lever number two. Lever number three is capital. So you're going to buy companies, you're going to put capital to work in some way to grow. So that's kind of it. I mean, outside of multiple expansion, value creation is really those three things. And so on the cost side with IT, we think about our partnership with Vega as being extraordinarily turnkey when it comes to getting your arms around your cloud infrastructure. Um, it's one of the few platforms that puts together the four major hyperscalers, so AWS, Azure, GCP, and OCI, and then also some of the other assets, the snowflakes of the world, and that data. If a company has any kind of density of data, they probably have a tremendous amount of spend in the cloud. That category is only going up and to the right, and the complexity of that is only increasing, especially in a private equity environment where there's potential acquisitions and multiple domains and multiple environments. It's hard these days to find one place where everything's in one hyperscaler. They're typically scattered across multiple hyperscalers. And then even within that hyperscaler, there's infrastructure as a service kind of workloads, and there's platform workloads. And then there's other stuff like data egress. And there's no one tool that I've seen that pulls that all together, plus provides the financial stewardship over that and the FinOps in a box that Vega provides. I just haven't seen it. There's tools, there's optimizers, there's point solutions. You can kind of piece it together, and then you need somebody internally to kind of babysit those tools. What Vega brings to the table is all of that in one. Kris, I'll just tell you, we actually built a tool that kind of was like Vega, okay? Because it didn't exist yet. All right. So this is
Yep.
going back a few years. And we put an off the shelf optimizer together with some stuff that we cobbled together in Power Apps. And we cobbled together was the FinOps side of it, which was the tracking of here is the financial value of what I just did. So I'll give you a dumb example. I right sized a workload. It was provisioned at 64 processors. It only needed 32, and I switched it from 64 to 32. Boom, I saved all this money. All right, so now that's tracking on a spreadsheet somewhere, right? The other tools that we saw on market did not do that. They couldn't tell you the value of what I'd call as was. So I'm going to now stack up all the optimizations that I've performed. And so here to the CFO, and the CFO asks, do we have good stewardship over our cloud spend? I can have a roster of all the things that I've done and say, these are all of the activities that I've created. These are all the opportunities to action. Here's how I've addressed them. Here's the ones that are outstanding. Here's the ones that I've already done. Here's the ones that I'm going to do. Here's when. And to be able to really understand the business context for optimizing the environment. So our partnership with Vega was actually formed when we realized that you had a tool that did what we did and then some. And we said, okay, this doesn't make any more sense for us to do this sort of cobbled together solution. We would rather partner with Vega, who delivers that solution, who is increasing with innovation and is investing in, as an example, OCI. There's some we're running into clients that are using OCI alongside other stuff. They maybe move their Oracle environment to OCI, but they also have AWS. Great, we can now ingest that alongside the existing workloads. And so our partnership with Vega is extraordinarily important because it starts with value creation and it goes to the cost optimization thesis, and it continuously delivers value. It provides visibility, control, and cost takeout within this unruly category on the P&L, which is cloud. It's typically on a list of a CIO's stuff.
But it's got to be at the top. Yeah, yeah.
It's typically right there at the top. It's usually top 3, but most of the time it's right at the top, and it's only going up. And so our partnership is incredibly important. We deliver at E78 cost optimization across all categories. And then within IT, we have subspecialties and subcategory expertise. And we lean on Vega very heavily and bring that solution to bear as the cloud optimization component of broader cost optimization. And it's continuous.
Yeah, no, thanks, John, and I really appreciate the partnership because given our mutual help desk background, there is an important people aspect to this, right? Like, it's not just enough to share a graph or share some data. Like, there's a maturity model here around how you manage this stuff, how to think about it, business decisions that need to get made, right? Like, why would I choose to put this here or somewhere else? How do I think about that? And so those are human being decisions that need to get made and work that needs to get done. And I think that's the benefit here of this partnership is you guys have the people, you have the expertise to drive the outcome you're looking for. And then we're able to make it easier to get there so that you're not spinning your wheels, having to do this on your own or manually or use subpar tools. I think one of the things that we love around Vega is focus, right? So we focus in on the 3 things that we do really well: inform, optimize, and operate. So how do we make it easier for folks to understand their costs? How do we make it easier to optimize? And then how do we put those controls and automation in place that you talked about? And so I do think it's a great matchup, right? Where you're like, hey, you want to take the best of breed of software and then surround that with smart folks that can then help you implement that correctly. Because the reality is, you may not know Oracle. You bought somebody that has it, or you may not know Microsoft really well, and you're struggling with that, and that's okay. Like, everybody, listen, Amazon, I think, has hundreds, if not thousands now of services. They all bill differently. They all meter differently. Like, I remember looking at the AI page for pricing, and it's 24 pages deep. And some of it's token based, some of it's CPU based, some of it's memory based. How am I as a consumer ever going to understand that? Understand where my costs are going, what's driving it? Like, you really need to have a system in place. And then, by the way, it's billed by the hour. And so, so these large enterprises, have hundreds of millions or billions of rows of billing data every single month. If you don't have a system to analyze that, how do you do basic FinOps tasks like invoice reconciliation? Like, how do I even just book the charges I had? Did I get the credits I was supposed to get this month? Did those get applied correctly? Did my custom rates get applied correctly? Like, all those things that are super important to the business, to your point around maturity around managing costs, you've got to have a system to manage that. And that's really been our focus to say, hey, listen, we're going to provide the system, and then we're going to help other folks go do something with it, right? So go do something with the data or the outcomes. And so that's I think one of the reasons why it works so well. One of the things I wanted to chat about too, I feel like you guys have a strong opinion about sort of the maturity curve here with FinOps and how to think about it, right? So because FinOps in general, I think, is an interesting term. To your point, you guys drive a lot more cost reduction than just IT and just cloud, but FinOps, because cloud is so big and it's one of the biggest vendors. Amazon in particular typically is one of the biggest single line vendors on most P&Ls these days.
Yep.
It just is, right? Because people are spending at the level they're spending. And so help our audience understand a little bit better how you guys think about the maturity model of FinOps when you go into an organization. How do you help them build that maturity?
Right. So the first thing we do is get an understanding of how they're doing it today. So just what is your current approach to aligning cloud costs with the consumer's of those resources. And every organization is a little bit different, but the themes that we hear a lot, even in large enterprises, even in enterprises that on the outside seem like they're very mature, is that there's really not a good alignment, and that tag compliance is a little bit spotty, and that somebody pushed for it at one point, but then it kind of got away from them. And so they don't really, a lot of enterprises don't really have the tools in place to understand whether or not tags are compliant or not. And so many of the organizations that we work with just honestly have some mix of compliance and maturity with how they think about cloud costs and how they align those to who's consuming them. Because let's face it, a lot of organizations, IT is the broker of these services. They're not necessarily consuming them. They may be doing some level of provisioning. They may be even doing some level of code production, but a lot of times the consumption of these workloads is outside of IT, and so there's quite a bit of the finger pointing that takes place. And who owns it? Does the business that is consuming it own it? Does IT who provisioned it own it? Is it contractually somewhere else? And so what we find is just by instituting FinOps, by putting in the right framework to better understand who's consuming what is the cost of those services, and expressing those costs in business language to say that this business unit consumed this much of this resource, and it costs this much, and this is how it's trending, and here's how it's forecasting. To be able to express those otherwise technical assets in business language, that is I think, where ultimately where organizations are trying to get to align the cost with who's consuming, to make sure that those resources are being allocated at the most cost efficient possible way, um, that there's not any runaway spend that's in place, that there's not any gotchas, any anomalies that are going to creep up mid cycle that are going to be surprises. Um, I think that is the definition of the maturity, right? Is of maturity. It's having a framework in place, having the visibility and the control and the cadence and rigor around the environment, the cloud environment, to really understand those costs and to be able to project them properly. So what we do with our clients is we start by just understanding their current state. We get a sense of where they're trying to go. Um, and then we typically work in partnership with Vega to put that framework in place, that FinOps framework in place. What's great about the Vega solution is it includes that fractional FinOps resource and that rigor, a sparring partner, if you will, that is just looking objectively at the environment and then providing guidance and feedback based on what he or she sees in that environment. And what we find with our clients is they're able to relax. They're able to start to trust the data. They're able to better understand their own environment. And this becomes less a black box kind of single line invoice with a big number on it, and more of a resource that's being allocated in a way that aligns to what the business needs are and the expectations are. It really helps organizations go from centralizing those costs to starting to show those back to the consuming business units, to actually charging those costs, aligning those with the consuming business units. Um, but then also lowering those overall costs. One thing I'll find we found that's very astounding is when organizations have an existing tool in place, oftentimes they go, well, yeah, we have that tool. It's maybe sitting on a shelf, and so, I think she's running it. I don't know. They're paying for a tool typically too much. Usually, when we go in and displace that tool, just not because the technology, the Vegas technology is so good, because it does identify optimizations that the others don't. I think also just having that rigor and that cadence and having the human side of it, the accountability side of it, having that put in place is what oftentimes leads us to consistently going 10, 15, 20% incremental to the savings that they had already been seeing. And so, yeah, Vega is an essential, Vega is an essential part of instituting FinOps governance and instituting FinOps maturity in an enterprise.
John, when you think about portcos or other folks that you work with in the PE world, where do you think the industry is in terms of their on this maturity curve? So where do you see the opportunity? Where do you think folks are? Um, is it is it still super early in terms of people really getting a handle around this stuff? Are people decent about it? It sounds like you're running into replacing tools, so I would assume that they're getting maybe the basics done, but not getting to some of the other things, right? So maybe some of this discipline or other things. We'd love to hear your thoughts on the market in general. Like where are we?
I think level one is an organization, because of budgeting reasons, demands the finance side demands that IT express those costs for cloud in some way that is blown back to the business units that are consuming. Okay. So that behavior alone drives some level of maturity to understanding where those cloud costs are. Okay. So that's sort of level one is I know what I have. I know who's spending what kind of. Okay. Level two is I know what I have. I know who's spending what. And then I've identified ways in which we can save and optimize the resource allocation that we have. Okay. And I'm doing that on kind of one pane of glass. And I think level three is we now have a collaborative process that involves multiple stakeholders in the consumption of the data and the opportunities and the ways in which we can optimize that. And so that there's a continuous process that's in place. Um, and so the tools and the techniques in which organizations are doing that are just going to vary. At the bottom, at the very base level, is the tools that are out of the box with the various cloud platforms that exist. Those typically are very rudimentary. They obviously don't work across in a multi-cloud environment, and they typically leave a lot of savings on the table. I'll give you an example of the type of spend that you're not going to see in, let's say, an Azure environment. We have a client who has, let's say, mostly an IaaS-based um, a lift and shift, right? They'd moved 50 or 100 different servers into Azure, but they were finding that the egress, the network egress, was actually consuming a pretty material portion of their cloud expense. Um, they looked at several different tools, including the built-in tools with Azure, and they could not get their arms around it. We finally put in Vega, and it was very clear very quickly where that egress, who is consuming what within that one segment. So it wasn't just lumped as one spend, it was actually sub-segmented by workload. And so you asked where organizations are at. They're really kind of in one of those three tiers. They're typically using the out-of-the-box tools, or maybe a tool that's being provided to them or that their predecessor had. Um, but it's varying levels of adoption. And it's rare that you come across an organization with a really mature FinOps process.
Yeah, no, I think we see the same thing, and it's one of the reasons why we continue to push more and more optimization opportunities and other things within the Vega platform because we want to continue to grow. Right, things are changing, the cloud providers are changing, so you always need to stay on top of that, bring in more data sources, whatever it might be. So I appreciate that insight. I want to talk about Gen AI for a minute because we talked a little bit early on about it. It's obviously there's a lot of spend going on. There's a lot of hype around it. I mean, I guess the first question is what's actually useful here? Like, what should organizations be thinking about in terms of consuming AI, and then what should they just ignore because it's all hype? Like, what's helpful? Do you think?
It's a great question. I said at the outset, this is that Gen AI is very disruptive. I think that there are at least three kind of ways to think about AI today in an organization. The first layer is you need to provide something that everybody can access. Okay. So that's, call it an out of the box GPT that ideally keeps the information that's being inputted into that GPT, keeps that sovereign to the customer, to the client. Okay. So that's the very base level. And I say that because if you're not providing some safe place to go that allows most, if not all of your client of your end users to harness Gen AI, then they will use whatever's on their phone and they will upload that stuff to a retail available model. And that information is now gone.
Yeah.
And so having an AI policy in place that says, here's our tool set, this is what we use, everybody gets this, and the data stays sovereign. That I think is table stakes. Every organization needs to do that, unless you can control the cell phone and users' behavior. Okay, so that's at a very base level, and I think that can be used for the very simple productivity kind of things. Writing emails, those kinds of things, writing tools. Those are very basic. I think that sort of goes without saying. Okay. Next level up from that is harnessing the AI that is off of your package systems. So these are in your Salesforces and your ERP platforms, your Microsofts. It's what comes out of the box or is being added to the platforms that you already own. Um, Ideally, these can allow you to surface insights and or create new workflows that you potentially didn't have before, enable new innovation. I've seen it in contact centers. So this is the stuff that is commercially available. That's a bolt-on to an existing technology that enhances existing technologies that are in place. Okay, so fairly consistent paradigm. I think as we go up the pyramid, the number of users that are accessing that starts to get reduced a bit, just based on the licenses you have, based on the interactions with those systems. And then I think above that, in a more niche use case, is workflow. This is agentic AI. This is orchestrating workflow. This is what we used to call RPA, right? Remote process automation. It's automating a process that's internal. It's essentially accelerating the work that humans are already doing. And it's wrapping that, it's enabling because you can do it in a very cost effective way. It allows organizations to do things faster. And so we've seen it with the simplest use cases. I just heard a use case today as a great example, the one that's off the top of my head, where an insurtech business is taking in inbound requests over email. Agentic, the AI agent is actually interpreting that email, extrapolating elements off of that. Again, it's in the insurance business, so they're maybe taking claims data or maybe it's policy data, and they're using what is known and inputting that into the respective system and then creating a case around that and then responding back to the user. So previously, this would be a human that would be taking in this input. Um, and this, in this case, it's actually increasing their productivity. So it's a very simple example of how you can create a bespoke agentic workflow that orchestrates across multiple systems. In this case, email, maybe it's an in-house system, maybe it's a claim system, and then maybe it's a help desk type system, a ticketing system, a Jira or a Zendesk. So orchestrating across multiple systems, I think that is where ultimately all organizations are trying to get to, is to really harness what Gen AI has to bring to the table, right? So those three tiers, that very basic productivity tier, next tier is kind of what I'd call just the shrink wrapped enterprise tier, and then that third tier is a bit more bespoke, where there are bots and agents that are created that are workflow type agents.
Assuming I've digitized a decent chunk of my business or what I need to sort of run my business, how should I be thinking about how much dollars I'm going to allocate to AI to achieve some of these things? So maybe I'm new, right? So I don't know how much to put into R&D, how much should I put into process automation, how much should I put into some of these bespoke sort of things. Like I think that's one of the struggles that a lot of our customers have is how should I be thinking about AI from a budget perspective? So if I've got a pie of 100% of my cloud costs, how much of that should be in AI, do you think?
Gosh, that's a great question. I don't think we know the answer quite yet because it's just so new. Um, what I would tell you is if you can segment into those three tiers, and maybe there's even a fourth one in there around insights and data, right? So, but let's just assume for a minute it's those three tiers. I would say that base tier is table stakes. Um, any kind of specialty tools that are buy up kind of tools, I would be rationing those tools based on who can maximize what AI has to bring to bear. So I would not be sprinkling that everywhere. These are your buy ups in, for instance, Microsoft has a buy up, Salesforce has a buy up. I would be rationing those and ensuring that based on roles that people are actually going to harness that. At E78, we actively monitor the consumption of those, and we do this for our clients as well. To just go, all right, who's actually using these tools? We have a wait list. We do some level of rationing on the buy up side of it. Everyone has access to a protected GPT client, but it's that kind of going up the stack of benefit. So that's that piece. To directly answer your question, what I'm seeing right now at different organizations is a little bit of a split. And the split is between open source AI and commercially available AI. In the open source world, clients are able to harness these LLMs and put them in their own environments and put a net around those, put a ring around those, and manage those like they're any other system. And they can ensure that the data does not egress beyond their environment by doing that. So that typically means standing up one of the open source models, Meta as an example, DeepSeek as an example, pulling that into their environment, and then managing that, and then building bots and capabilities on top of that. And then the other model being commercial, where there's an agreement with a commercial provider. Um, there's an understanding that the data is going to be sovereign to that organization, and then the model is being accessed on a token basis, and it's metered. What I've seen is that the open source model has a lot more, not a big surprise, a lot of upfront costs to get that stood up, both in talent and in resource. Um, versus the commercial model is more of a rent, versus a buy. And so those costs there are metered, and it's based on the complexity of the bots that are built and how much consumption they have that's all tokenized. And so the short answer to your question is no one knows yet what what the what the right split is. Um, I just like to start with use cases.
Yeah.
I'm a start small guy.
Yeah.
What I love about the commercial models is you can do that on a very safe, simple, just like the workflow I shared earlier in the insurance case, right? You can start with something that's really obvious, if you will, to go, how can we do this better? And then to build off of those use cases from there. And again, assuming that there's a good AI governance framework in place, assuming that there's a good adoption within the organization of the tools. Um, but I think every organization today, I think the way that this is going to ultimately evolve, this is my belief, is that it's not going to be IT. I think IT is going to serve as a broker and to create an environment that allows the business units to ultimately consume these things. But because there are so many no code solutions, a lot of this innovation can be harnessed without a computer science degree. And so the key, I think, for IT organizations is to create that innovative environment that allows for these use cases that IT may not even know about. But there are a lot of smart folks outside of IT that are figuring out how to use this stuff. And so, how do you create an environment that really enables that, empowers those folks without letting it run away by keeping the data secure within an environment, but still allowing the innovation to flourish and to do it in a commercially reasonable way? I think this is where we are right now. These organizations are just kind of stuck. They want to keep their data safe. They're afraid of it getting out there if they've got IP. They don't want to overspend in AI. They're afraid that they're going to spend way too much money or go down a path that's immature and pick the wrong horse. And so there's a bit of paralysis that I'm seeing. And so the adoption is not quite as aggressive as you might think it would be. It's in fits and starts. It's in pockets. It's not as broadly adopted yet. And I think that's going to change very quickly, Kris.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think we're not seeing it just yet in the enterprise in terms of people, you know, making it a meaningful percentage of their bill. I definitely think we're in the R&D stages. We see a lot of concepts and proof of concepts and those kinds of things. And then to your point, like maybe behind the scenes, like task automation or workflow automation, which is great uses of those things, assuming you can do it at a scalable cost perspective, right? One of the last little topics I want to cover before we wrap up here is sort of this, and you touched on it a little bit throughout the whole conversation, this whole concept of tech strategy and turning that into ROI. And I think, obviously you can spend a lot on cloud, you can spend a lot on AI, and we want to make sure that we're getting value out of that, right? It's not good enough to just account for the costs. We want to understand, okay, what's happening with that? Where's that going? What revenue is that generating? What profit is it generating? Am I doing the right things here? And so when you guys work with customers to help them understand that, what guidance would you give audience members around, hey, how do I think about this cloud AI thing, and how should I be trying to measure ROI, and what are the things I should be worried about? What are the things I shouldn't be worried about? Maybe just give a little bit of color around how you guys think about helping IT leaders do a better job of turning that tech strategy into ROI.
It's a great question. I think the key with ROI, especially with AI, anything that touches the business, is that you really need business collaboration, and you need somebody on the business side who really understands it. As much as we as IT leaders believe and think that we understand the business value of something, there's nothing like having a group of folks within an organization, a team, who can nod their head and say, yes, this has created this value here. And so whenever I think about ROI for something that's that IT touches, but is really kind of in the four walls of the business, I want that business leader to be arm in arm with me to really quantify what the value really truly is. That way, it's not the person who's responsible for the technology, coming up with numbers. That's not a great place to be in when it comes to ROI. Now, it's different if there's an internal business case, like, let's say, code acceleration. Let's say you have developers who are using AI to assist with code QA, to assist with writing code. Absolutely, you should be able to quantify the value of that and the ROI of that. But if it's something that is it outside the four walls of IT, my counsel is to always partner with someone on the business side and work with that person to really develop the right ROI framework. And that comes back to where we started, which is the human side of IT. It's really that collaboration with your peers, with your teammates. There's nothing more important than that.
No, I appreciate that. It's one of those things where you can't make up the numbers as an IT person because you're not going to know. But if you do collaborate, right, it's that human kind of coming back to the beginning of the conversation. It's the human side of the business, right? You need to go make relationships with folks in the business, understand what their drivers are, and then help them understand how you're marrying up investments or costs to help them with those things. Because
Exactly right.
I think a lot of times people don't understand the art of the possible, and so that's where technologists can come in and help. Is, hey, there's some really cool things we could do here. What would make a change in the business for the positive, right? And so I think that's a good thing to think about. Well, John, it's been awesome to hang out today. Thanks for joining our podcast.
It's fun.
This has been great, and would love to have you back again.
Love to be here. Thanks so much for the time. Thanks for the partnership with Vega. And we're looking forward to many more years of success together.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Kris.